The Vikings. Talk to a climate denier long enough, and he's sure to start telling you about the Vikings. The climate deniers love the Vikings. They love to talk about some long-forgotten halcyon era when happy Vikings lived in a lush Greenland, celebrating a benign, warm period of prosperity and happiness. It's an article of absolute faith among climate deniers that 1,000 years ago the whole planet was warmer than today, and that the current warming is just part of a grand cycle mediated by the sun or some other mechanism. They call it the medieval warm period. And if you ask, they'll point to this graph as the proof. And this is actually a good graph. We like this graph. It's well sourced. It comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from their first report in 1990. When the IPCC first met, one of the things they realized was that the infant science of climatology didn't know that much about temperature data over the last millennium. They turned to someone who had been studying the problem for a long time. H. Lamb was an eminent scientist, a climatologist, and someone who had spent decades collecting evidence of temperature data over the last 1,000 years. He studied tree rings and agricultural records and historical accounts of weather and climate events, and put together the first credible graph of temperatures in northern Europe over the preceding millennium. And it was this data that the IPCC drew upon for their first attempt at modeling the last 1,000 years. The most eye-catching feature of the graph is the large hump around 1000 AD, generically labeled medieval warm period. Denialists have seized on this and still insist that this early, incomplete picture is the most accurate and up-to-date snapshot available of global climate history. There are a few questions about this graph. Lamb's data came almost entirely from northern Europe and overwhelmingly from central England. Could it be that the so-called warm period was a regional effect, a local aberration peculiar to the northern Atlantic region? What the IPCC needed was a larger view that sampled sources from a much broader area of the planet. That task was taken up later in the decade by climatologist Michael Mann at Penn State University. Spreading a much wider net, Mann and his team collected not just tree rings, but historical data, coral samples, and ice core data, and other evidence from over the entire northern hemisphere. In 1998, the Mann team published their graph, which eventually became part of the IPCC third assessment report in 2000. The graph was striking. Gone was the medieval warming hump, and what now appeared as the most dramatic feature was an upturn in global temperatures in the last 150 years. This configuration gave the graph its popular name, the hockey stick. The hockey stick immediately became a lightning rod for climate deniers, some of whom thought they found a flaw in Mann's statistical methodology. The controversy flared in the media, on the internet, and eventually even ended up at the highest levels of Congress and the government. And that's where Abraham Lincoln comes in. In 1863, Lincoln put his signature to a document creating the National Academy of Science. Although not a constitutional office, the Academy was meant to be, in effect, a Supreme Court for scientific questions that Lincoln realized were becoming more and more a critical element in governmental decision-making. The Academy is recognized as the gold standard of scientific assessment. And in 2005, the Academy was commissioned by Congress to rule on the hockey stick controversy. Their report was released in 2006 and contained some criticism of the hockey stick process, but overall affirmed the graph as an accurate summary of current knowledge. The basic conclusion, the Academy wrote, was that the late 20th century warmth in the northern hemisphere was unprecedented during at least the last 1,000 years. This conclusion has subsequently been supported by an array of evidence that includes both additional large-scale surface temperature reconstructions and pronounced changes in a variety of local proxy indicators, such as melting on ice caps and the retreat of glaciers around the world, which in many cases appear to be unprecedented during at least the last 2,000 years. So the National Academy had weighed in. Their verdict? Medieval warming, not so much. The following year, the IPCC republished the Mann graph along with new research from other teams following their own methodologies. There was no longer just a hockey stick, but a whole hockey team. In 2008, Mann and his team expanded on their graph, incorporating the suggestions of the National Academy panel, and produced a new graph that stretched back an additional 700 years. Yes, climate scientists know that the Earth is much older than a few thousand years, and that climate has changed in much earlier times as well. We'll be talking about much longer stretches of time in upcoming programs, so I hope you'll keep coming back, bring your denier friends, and continue to support the Climate Denial Crock of the Week.